The lobby of Hawthorne Enterprises was breathtaking. Marble floors stretched like polished rivers, reflecting the soft glow of crystal chandeliers overhead. The scent of fresh leather and expensive cologne lingered in the air. Every inch of the space screamed power, precision, and wealth. This was a place where fortunes were made, lost, and measured in millions. Alexander Hawthorne, the company's billionaire CEO, entered the lobby with the air of a man who expected the world to bend to his will. His suit was perfectly tailored, shoes shined to a mirror finish, and his posture radiated confidence. Today was critical. He was about to finalize a $200 million deal, a transaction that would secure a partnership worth more than some countries' GDPs. He walked with purpose, every step echoing across the marble floor. At the front desk stood Emma Clark, the new cashier. Her uniform was pristine, her name tag gleaming, but there was a hint of nervousness in the way she shifted her weight and adjusted her glasses. This was her first week, and though she was competent, she hadn't yet mastered the intimidating aura that wealth and power often carried. Still, she had one thing going for her, a sharp mind and an instinct that rarely failed. Alexander approached, expecting efficiency and silence. "I'll be quick," he said smoothly, placing a sleek leather folder on the desk. Emma glanced at the transaction terminal. Her eyes flickered over the numbers, and something didn't feel right. The sequence Alexander intended to use was standard for most accounts, but she recognized a subtle flaw in the programming, a minor glitch that, at this scale, could spell disaster. Her heart thumped in her chest. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Sir, wait," she said, her voice slightly trembling but firm enough to draw his attention. Alexander raised an eyebrow, a mix of curiosity and amusement on his face. "Excuse me, that's the wrong trick," Emma said, her hands trembling just slightly as she pointed to the screen. Alexander froze. "Wrong trick." His tone was sharp, a hint of disbelief. Emma nodded. "Yes, sir. If you process it this way, the calculation sequence will round incorrectly, and the $200 million could be off by a significant fraction. I've seen this exact terminal error before. There's an alternate method that ensures accuracy." A stunned silence fell across the lobby. Employees peered over cubicle edges. Even security officers stopped mid-step, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Alexander's confident smirk, the one that had unsettled executives and investors alike, faltered. "Do you know what you're talking about?" he asked, his tone edged with both challenge and incredulity. Emma held his gaze, her nerves steadying into determination. "Yes, sir. I handled a similar high-value transaction at my previous position. If we use this method, everything will calculate perfectly." Alexander studied her face, searching for hesitation. There was none. Her confidence was quiet, unassuming, yet firm. He could feel the weight of her certainty, the kind of clarity that rarely appeared in anyone, let alone a newcomer. Finally, he leaned back slightly, a hint of a smile forming. "All right, show me." Emma's fingers moved quickly, confidently, across the touchscreen. Each motion precise, deliberate, as if she were performing a carefully choreographed dance. Alexander watched intently, his eyes narrowing as numbers flashed across the monitor. The tension was palpable. The clock ticked in the background, and Alexander could almost hear the silent heartbeat of $200 million hanging in the balance. One misstep, one hesitation, could undo weeks of preparation. Emma completed the alternate sequence. She handed him the confirmation slip. Alexander's eyes scanned it, checking the numbers again and again. Everything was correct. Perfect. He let out a slow exhale, a mixture of relief and admiration washing over him. "You just saved me $200 million, he said, his tone calm but layered with astonishment. Emma's cheeks flushed. "It was nothing, sir. Just careful observation and experience." Alexander leaned closer, studying her. "Most people wouldn't have dared to question me, let alone intervene seconds before a deal." "Some mistakes are too costly to ignore," Emma replied, her voice steady, almost matter-of-fact. In that moment, Alexander realized something remarkable. Money and power could command respect, but intelligence, courage, and honesty commanded far more. The quiet cashier before him had reminded him that even a billionaire CEO could be challenged, and saved, by the smallest voice in the room. For the first time that day, Alexander smiled genuinely. Not the polite, controlled smile of a CEO, but the unguarded, impressed smile of a man recognizing true skill when he saw it. And Emma, unaware of the magnitude of what she had just prevented, simply returned to her station with a quiet pride, blissfully ignorant that she had just altered the fate of a $200 million deal, and perhaps the trajectory of her own future. The lobby of Hawthorne Enterprises had returned to its usual hum of activity, but for Alexander Hawthorne, nothing felt ordinary anymore. He sat in the corner executive suite overlooking the gleaming city skyline, his thoughts refusing to settle on the $200 million deal he had just salvaged. It wasn't the deal itself that lingered, he had closed hundreds before. It was the cashier, Emma Clark. He replayed the scene in his mind, her small, determined hands dancing across the terminal, the calm but firm voice that had stopped him dead in his tracks, the way she had held his gaze without fear. She hadn't flinched, she hadn't fumbled, she had just done what was right. Alexander leaned back in his chair, uncharacteristically lost in thought. He had spent his life surrounded by power and wealth, but he realized something that morning: confidence, experience, and intelligence didn't always come with a title. Sometimes, it came from the unlikeliest of people, the ones no one expected to make a difference. The next day, Alexander returned to the lobby slightly earlier than usual. He had a pretense, checking in on post-deal paperwork, but the truth was far simpler: he wanted to see Emma again. She noticed him approaching and straightened instinctively. Her uniform was still crisp, her name tag shining, but there was a subtle warmth in her eyes as she looked at him. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said politely, her voice calm yet slightly nervous. Alexander inclined his head. "Good morning. How are you today?" Emma blinked, taken aback. Most people in his position didn't bother with small talk. "I'm, well, thank you, sir. How about you?" He smiled faintly. "Better than yesterday, thanks to you." Her cheeks flushed lightly. She looked down, unsure how to respond. Alexander studied her closely, realizing for the first time that there was more to her than the timid demeanor she projected. There was precision, intelligence, and courage in every gesture she made. Over the following week, Alexander found reasons to linger in the lobby. Sometimes it was casual, checking in, asking for signatures, or reviewing the deal. But more often, he watched Emma work. She moved with efficiency, but never mechanically. Her focus was precise, her gestures confident, and her awareness of potential errors uncanny. He began noticing small things about her. The way she adjusted her glasses when concentrating, the faint crease between her brows when a calculation didn't seem right, the gentle kindness with which she treated even the lowest-ranking employees. One afternoon, while she reconciled a batch of smaller accounts, Alexander approached her desk. "You have an unusual talent," he said softly, leaning on the counter. "Most people wouldn't notice the small error that could have ruined yesterday's deal." Emma looked up, startled by the compliment from a man of his reputation. I just pay attention to details," she replied quietly. Alexander shook his head, genuinely impressed. "No, it's more than that. You saw something everyone else missed. You acted despite knowing it could have been uncomfortable." Emma paused, feeling a mixture of pride and embarrassment. "I just didn't want the mistake to happen, sir." He studied her for a long moment, realizing that this combination of bravery, intelligence, and humility was rare. Alexander, who had spent decades surrounded by people willing to flatter him, suddenly recognized something far more valuable: honesty. That evening, back in his office, Alexander couldn't shake the thought of her. He stared out at the city lights, the numbers from the deal still glowing on his laptop, but his mind wandered to Emma. He thought about how she had saved him, not with authority or power, but with skill and courage. He realized that in her quiet, understated way, she had commanded more respect than most executives in his company. For the first time in years, Alexander felt a new kind of admiration, one he hadn't experienced in boardrooms or negotiations. It was personal, genuine, and unexpected. And in that realization, a thought struck him sharply: perhaps this new cashier was more than just a fleeting presence in his life. Perhaps she was someone who could teach him something he had long forgotten: humility, respect, and the power of a single, courageous voice. The following morning, Alexander made a decision. He walked through the lobby with a subtle but purposeful confidence, approaching Emma with a small, unexpected smile. "Miss Clark," he said, quietly, "I'd like to discuss a more permanent opportunity with you. If you're willing." Emma blinked, caught off guard. "A permanent opportunity?" "Yes," he said, with a warmth in his eyes that rarely appeared. "You've proven you have the judgment, skill, and courage that this company needs, and I'd like you to consider a bigger role." Emma felt her heart skip a beat. The quiet cashier who had nervously saved a $200 million deal was now being offered a chance to step into a world she had only dreamed of, all because she had spoken up when it mattered most. Alexander watched her reaction carefully, realizing something else too. This wasn't just about business anymore. There was something personal stirring, something unexpected, and perhaps, even transformative. The following week, the atmosphere at Hawthorne Enterprises was electric, though the reason went unnoticed by most employees. Alexander Hawthorne, CEO and billionaire, had been unusually focused on a single task, ensuring Emma Clark received the recognition she deserved. After the $200 million deal, Alexander had been restless. Most CEOs would have moved on, counting the millions secured, the contracts signed, and the accolades promised by shareholders. But Alexander couldn't stop thinking about her, the cashier who had dared to speak up when it mattered most. That morning, he arrived at the lobby early, bypassing his usual security escort. The space felt different without the usual throng of clients and employees. Emma was already at her station, quietly organizing receipts. Her sleeves were rolled neatly, and her expression was focused but calm. Alexander approached slowly, his steps echoing softly. Against the marble floor. "Miss Clark," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Could I have a moment?" Emma looked up, startled. "Yes, sir." Her hands instinctively straightened on the counter. Alexander paused, considering his words carefully. "I wanted to thank you, properly. Not just for saving yesterday's deal, but for your courage, skill, and integrity. Most people would have stayed silent. You didn't." Emma felt her cheeks heat, a mixture of pride and disbelief washing over her. I only did what felt right, sir," she said softly. "Right," Alexander agreed, smiling faintly. "But what you did was extraordinary. You didn't just protect the company, you proved that intelligence, honesty, and attention to detail can outweigh titles and experience." He gestured for her to follow him to his office. The walk was quiet, almost intimate, as they moved through the marble halls. Employees glanced curiously, sensing the unusual interaction but unsure of its significance. Once inside the executive suite, Alexander gestured for her to sit. "I've been thinking," he said. "You have an instinct, a precision, and a level of calm under pressure that we need in leadership positions. I'd like you to consider a permanent role, one where your judgment and skill can influence the company, rather than just observe it from the lobby." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Leadership, she had only ever imagined being a cashier, a small cog in a massive machine. Now, a billionaire CEO was offering her something she had never dreamed of, an opportunity to rise. I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice catching. "You don't have to decide today," Alexander replied, his tone softening. "Just think about it. You've already proven that courage and intelligence matter more than fear. That's all I need to know for now." Over the next few days, Alexander found himself noticing her more, not just her skill, but her subtle kindness. How she treated the interns with patience, how she carefully listened when employees asked questions, how she never flaunted her intelligence. Every observation made him respect her more. He realized that in a world driven by wealth and status, Emma's authenticity was rare. And in that authenticity, he felt something unfamiliar but thrilling, admiration that bordered on fascination. Finally, the day came when Emma accepted the offer for a larger role within the company. Alexander watched as she confidently navigated the boardroom for the first time, explaining minor procedural adjustments that even senior executives had overlooked. Her calm confidence and sharp insight were mesmerizing. After the meeting, Alexander approached her. "You see," he said softly, "you belong here, more than I could have imagined." Emma smiled, genuinely, without the nerves she had felt the first day. "Thank you for trusting me, sir." Alexander hesitated, then added quietly, almost personally, "Not just trusting you, but noticing you. You've changed how I see things, how I see people." Her eyes widened slightly, catching the sincerity in his tone. I just did my best," she said, though her voice carried newfound confidence. He smiled, a rare, warm expression that softened the usually stoic lines of his face. "Your best was more than enough. And it will continue to be." Later that evening, Alexander returned to his office, reflecting on the week. He realized that sometimes, the smallest voice in the room can create the biggest impact. And sometimes, the most unexpected people, like a shy cashier, can teach a billionaire CEO lessons about courage, humility, and recognition that no boardroom ever could. Meanwhile, Emma's life had changed. She was no longer just a cashier. She was part of something bigger, a company, a legacy, and a story that reminded everyone: bravery, intelligence, and honesty are invaluable, even when wielded quietly. And as she walked through the lobby that night, Alexander watched from his office window, smiling quietly. She had saved a deal, changed his perspective, and perhaps, even changed his life.